Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for invitation, Professor Thomas. Glad to be here. I've been involved in this profession for 30 years, and I have to say that when I started in 1987, this profession was very different than what it is today. Today I'm going to talk about a few topics which actually summarizes everything that Professor said right before me. And what I'm going to talk about today is basically, as I said, a summary of everything, separated in a few topics which all begin with C. And I'm going to begin with the fact that we all know that there is a very strong scientific proof of how much lighting influences human beings and how much it influences nature. So no one is disputing that. The fact is that today we live in the era in which there is a great confusion between everything that we know and everything that we do. When it comes to lighting, we have a very great sorry, I'm pressing these buttons. We have light, which we can call that it is in the shadow of technology, because so much technology has been done around light, but not that much in the actual light itself after the LED, which is really a disruptive innovation in the last decade, came into the market. So having all the technology that is available today, knowing what is available, but we have absolutely no idea where this technology is going to lead us in the future. Because the ecology of industrial reality is something that is pretty confusing for those who specify and for those who use lighting as a tool for their jobs. I'm assuming that all of you here are in any way involved in lighting, and most of you make a living out of lighting. So it is pretty difficult today to specify a product in a project because, as you know, manufacturers are not forced to specify the exact data in their catalogs. So unless you turn on the fitting at night and you see it by yourself, you really a lot of times don't know how is it going to work. You know, we are working with some companies that you trust, companies that have, you know, decades of experience, and companies that care. But unfortunately, in the market, there are so many companies that the only thing that they care about is the short-term profit. So the fact is that we can avoid reality. I really like this from Ayn Rand, but we cannot avoid the consequences of that reality. That applies obviously to our job and applies to everything that we did in a couple, last century or so, to ourselves, to the nature, and so on. And the fact is that our public lighting today is not much different in a concept than it was in the 19th century. So I think there is a time in which we should start thinking about the sustainable and adaptive lighting design strategy for the 21st century, which is the reason why we have this conference today. And long time ago, when we were working in Saudi Arabia on this greenfield project, we developed a part of this methodology which analyzes and creates the lighting system which is not considered as a fitting or a pole. It is considered as a dynamic grid. It's all connected and it works under certain conditions. And that is pretty much everything that we've been discussing in these 2 days. Those certain conditions can be many different things in many different areas. It can be something that can be also divided in the city and then, transferred to the country or to even further away, where we shouldn't anymore talk about the simple calculations as we are by the certain norms, but we are creating a light topography in that case. So the example of seasonal change in my town, Pula, which is on the Adriatic coast in Croatia, is approximately this. So we have 2 very distinct seasons. In my town, in my area, during the summer, we have approximately 80,000 people more than what we have during the winter. And the activities of the people in the city during the winter are completely the opposite of what happens during the summer. Because during the winter, after people go to work, at 8 o'clock in the evening, you can practically find nobody on the street. But during the summer, the city is completely packed with people until 2 o'clock in the morning, or 1 or 2 or 3, or sometimes when we have a film festival, even longer. So you can see the difference in here, that the static lighting is always on since twilight until the sunrise. Dynamic lighting should actually follow the human activity and follow the human need for every different situation. This is approximation of the seasonal change, and you can see the yellow line is actually the light. So we did this graphic representation of the town of Pula here, where we tried to graphically show what that really means. This is a clock ticking here, and this is the energy consumption depending on the time of the night and depending on this particular, not on the season, but depending on those different zones. You see here, we put different zones which go on and off, all depending on certain conditions. I'm going to repeat that again because it's a little bit fast. So you can see that the energy consumption is very much dependent on the time of the night, and it's very much dependent on the zone and the area in the city. And of course, other conditions should be the ones that talk about the seasonal, a full moon, a rain, or wind, or whatever. There are so many things that we can add. But the fact is that this only talks about the energy consumption. In here, we reduced the problem of light pollution dramatically, because at certain point we have absolutely no light because we don't need it. So energy and light pollution is just one thing that we are talking about. But we lighting designers, which is what I am, we have to consider much more than energy and much more than the effect of lighting on the sky. We have to consider something that I call the anatomy of visual experience for human beings. And these are the basic principles of that concept. One of them is the owner's pride, for which we rarely talk about. And owner's pride means that everybody who lives in a place, in his community, has a certain pride and really likes to live in a nice place. Lighting certainly contributes very much to that. Because lighting, as I said yesterday, is not important for the architecture or for the urban space. It's important for the people that live in it. And lighting designers are definitely not activists. We are active participants. And the creative process is directly connected with the context of time, space, technology, and culture. So later I'm going to show you a project which is very site-specific, and I like to say that every lighting project is site-specific. So if we want to describe a profession of lighting designers today, we can use this graph that you all know what it is, which is electromagnetic waves, and there's a small portion of visible spectrum here which we are talking about. If we just change the names in here, then we can describe what lighting designer is dealing with. We are dealing with other people because we have to talk to investors, we're dealing with architecture, engineers, contractors, suppliers, and all very, very different people. Then we have to consider all the norms, regulations, politics, sustainability. It's a very, very complex job that we are doing today, if you really want to do it really seriously. So basically, we have to be creative at the end in all these aspects that I said before. And I really like Sir Ken Robinson when he said that we should not educate ourselves out of creativity, because there are endless possibilities with the technology that is allowing us today to do things that it was impossible, a decade ago. So if we're going to transfer the job that we are doing in process of 1 meter, then obviously we have a subject, which is everybody that we are always involved with. We have an object which we have to illuminate, be it a building, a city, or whatever. Then we have formalities that we have to take care of, law and order, realizations, and then at the end of that, lighting designer is the one who brings that creative, critical centimeter into this process of the design. So creative ideas may consist of the innovative design, which is what Professor was saying before, very important. It can articulate new direction, or it can be an artist art for art's sake. For that purpose, I will show you an experiment that we did last year. So anyway, this project of Motavun is something that clearly talks that we cannot talk about ecology unless we talk about economy. And as you know, least developed countries have bigger problem with ecologies than... Okay. Okay, no problem. I'll go on. So the project talks about a small town in Croatia, which is very famous for its truffles and for wine and for food. It's a beautiful little town in the middle of the hills in the peninsula of Istria. And what is specific about this town is that you can see it from all sides. And some very famous people like Mario Andretti was born there. And then Andrea Antico, who invented music notes, or Joseph Russell, who invented the propeller. You wouldn't believe it, but it's true. And this town is really changing during the year. You have all these different seasonal changes that you can use. And you can see it from all sides, from all the roads that you're coming. You have a different visibility. But during the night, you can't really see much out of this town because, you know, it's just a little here and there pinpoint of light, and you can't really understand the beauty of the matrix, of the urban matrix and fabric of this town during the night. And the problem that people are stressing there is that they have a very short season, and they cannot really invest anywhere in this area because it's protected. So there are only 800 inhabitants that live here. But for some reason, people don't want to live on the other hills, and they don't want to build houses there. They don't want to invest. Nobody knows why. Everybody wants to live here. And the fact is that in the middle here, most of the inhabitants actually are strangers, people who from England, Germany, who bought little houses here, and they only come here and live in the summer. So they want to do something about this economy. Recently, they allowed someone to build a hotel around here because it's very difficult to raise some kind of economical strategies in such a very protected area, because obviously we don't want to build anything there. We don't want to change it. We want to preserve it as is. So when you walk inside the city, inside the town, it's very nice. You can see these medieval walls, and everything is so cozy, very romantic, but lighting is really terrible. I mean, you have these lanterns everywhere. You also have these private lights everywhere, which have nothing to do with public light, but that's something that I will talk about later. And then you have, you know, situations like this one, where you have a restaurant overlooking west, and they have the most beautiful sunsets, but then they put all these lanterns right here. So if you are sitting here, you practically can't see anything in the horizon. So it is a completely opposite of what lighting should be. Then the historic monuments, as you can see, are lit, you know, very simply with, you know, huge reflectors that at the end are very glary, and they are disturbing the whole view of the scenery. Plus they have these globes here, and then some private lighting here, some lanterns. So everything at night looks completely different than it is during the day. And in the summer, they have this very famous film festival that lasts for a week, and the city is alive all night. It's so small, you have thousands of people sleeping in tents, actually, around this little town, and they are coming there for the film festival, for food, and so on and so on. So anyway, the mayor calls me up, and he said, you know, we would like to do something with illuminating the, you know, the outer city walls and the churches. And we started this discussion, and you know, we did the first simulation where we did illuminate the city walls, but that picture really doesn't look good. I mean, it doesn't look good at all. So I said, you know, why don't we try to extend this light during the night to the main road, and maybe we can have, at least for those who are coming up to the town, something that will look a little bit different and that will extend the viewing area in the car. But it still didn't look good. So I had this, what I call experimental itch, and I decided to do something that is completely different. For some, maybe crazy, but I just decided to do it. And I hired a guy who actually 3D scanned the entire town with drones and cameras and so on. And I wanted to see what would this town look like if we can really make this something that is very unique, very different, and that will raise certain branding issues here, and that will definitely do something that is site-specific. So let's see what happens. I will do this, and who knows. So anyway, we started analyzing all this area. We started analyzing every single part of this town by walking through it many times, and we found that there are certain areas. And then we used our methodology, which I think should be used in every single public project today, where we really analyzed architectural typology that we have to illuminate. We analyzed what is going to be a possible visual experience for the user when he comes into this town at night, and what is the connective tissue in that town that connects all the architecture and all the people that live there. So once we identified all that, we have to decide what is the object contour that we want to achieve. What is the neighbor relation here? Because that's also important. What is the landscape relation, and what is the atmosphere that we want to achieve? So by starting using this methodology, we actually identified pretty much 7 different parts which should be taken into account for this project. So the first renders came out, and this is how it actually looks like. Then, in the middle of this process, we realized that the 5th facade, which is the roof, makes a very important part of this visual experience, because if you turn it off, you just lose part of the town. So we went so far that we actually illuminated the roofs. Now that raises a huge technical problem, of course. So we ended up designing a linear fitting which will be mounted this way so that the light doesn't go upwards and that it doesn't enter directly into the windows of these people. Of course, that all the facades that we choose are the ones that the people will actually give us a permission. Then, as you can see, and we turn it on, the entire picture of this town has this, theatrical, dramatic image during the night. And as you can see, we actually went all around, and everything is lit. Not everything, but everything seems to be lit. Even the graveyard trees, and the city walls, and the churches, and the private houses, and the entire image of this town is actually almost reproducing the image that is actually drawing people towards it. So another thing that we had to consider here is that, we actually dematerialized certain objects, and we shape the way the viewer will perceive the material object. I will show it to you how. And the theatrical approach considers all other environmental factors, and I will show you why. Because we live in the era of accelerated obsolescence. Accelerated obsolescence meaning that everything we see today pretty much is boring tomorrow. We constantly need something to be different, something to change. So for that purpose, we made this dynamic lighting here, something that will change according to all the conditions that I told you, something that will be manually controlled by someone who has a special need that evening, something that can turn on all the lights that I showed you before. It can turn on lights only on the streets, turn off everything, and play with the landscape and play with the facade so that someone who's visited it once will want to come again and then again, because every time, if that's what the community decides, we will have a different scenery which we can control through this dynamic light, as you can see it here. So naturally, when we have a situation like this, it's inevitable that we are dealing with private and we are dealing with public space, as I said before. In that case, we have to create some immaterial rhythms, urban and rural postures, and landscape poses. What would that mean? That means that in all this, we have to consider, as I was saying before, every single aspect of this. We need to talk to the people that live there, not only to the mayor and people who are running the town, but we need to talk to everybody else, because our architectural space is created by public and private, and the scenographic visual qualities are produced by blending these two categories of the space, and also by creating porous boundaries, which means that even if that picture looks complete and framed, it actually has a lot of places which are not lit. Sometimes we like to call it secret space, because secret space would be something where people would hide, it's dark, or maybe is defined only but very small source of light. But that's a different story. So these rhythms, postures, and poses that we introduced here, do at the end create this immaterial visual experience, an experience that will, the attention of that is to try to bring these people back to this town so that it will raise an interest and the economy. So after all this, the complexity comes into play, of course. This is something that is linked to what I was telling you, what our profession in the beginning is. We have to deal with power company, politics, light pollution, private money, and so on and so on. And then there is also a contradiction in which everybody wants progress, but no one wants change, you know that. And the contradiction is also here that we are someone that are well aware of every single aspect of lighting. I have lately there is this discussion in my country about this law about light pollution, and it seems that the light pollution activists and people who are directly involved in lighting in any way, engineers, lighting designers, are at the opposite sides. But this is absolutely not true. We're not at the opposite side. The problem is that we don't sit at the table together and we don't talk. Because nobody wants to pollute lighting. Nobody. Nobody wants to create damage for the environment. Nobody. But we are human beings. We live in the city and we do need a certain amount of light in order to perform our nightly activities. That's a fact. How are we going to do this? Technology and dynamic lighting is something that can probably help in the future. So, design by long-term priority based on the conditional logic that I told you may be one of the solutions. And at the end, who is judging our work? Creative people have their own way of seeing things. Naturally, you always have someone who may say, I don't like this, or I don't like that, I don't need this, or I don't need that. Somebody commented today for the color temperature change, do we need it? Well, if we have it, if we know the benefit of that, why wouldn't we have it? Every benefit that we know about lighting today, why can't we implement all of it into our city? All of it, So who's going to judge this? In this particular case, it's the mayor who's going to judge my work. And before I did the presentation is much longer than this. I didn't show you all the technical aspects of it because I didn't want to get into too much into technicality of it. So he's the one, and then I called him and I said, look, we did something that you didn't really order and expect. Maybe I should show it to you first, and if you don't like it, or for some reason you think I shouldn't show it to the city council, maybe we should just change the whole thing. So he said, no, don't worry about it, it's okay. Show it to me first. Let's see you at Thursday, 8 o'clock in the evening. I said, fine. So I went to this room, and he invited everybody. He invited absolutely everybody. The electrical guy, the garbage guy, the tourist board girl, everybody was there. I said, all right, this is going to be interesting, so let's see what happens. So I thought that it's going to happen something like this. That they're going to jump on me and say, you're crazy, this is too much money, no way we're going to do this. But actually funny thing happens. And the funny thing that is something that I connected to the 5 forms of light that I always talk about. You know, and the most important form of light is actually the form of consequence. You know, and that statement is pretty much directly linked to the beginning of Ayn Rand's statement. So the consequence of my presentation and having all this is that they were convincing me throughout the presentation how this is actually good and how they want it and how the money is not going to be a problem and how this is going to bring people to their town and how people want to build houses across the hill because then they're going to have a beautiful view. So they were actually convincing me, and I was telling them how difficult it is, how expensive it is, how technologically advanced it is. And, you know, you're going to have a lot of opposition because of that, because you're a small community, you don't have much money, you know, everybody's going to say, why don't you spend money here or money there? And they said, no, we can't spend any money in that hill. The only thing we can really do is something that you proposed, because we are not allowed to do anything else. That's it. So anyway, I would conclude that technology does allow us to do things that we couldn't think of a decade ago. And there is definitely a lack of constructive dialogue between all the parties involved that make decisions for better urban living. This is not only for lighting, you know, we should make that clear. I mean, urbanism today is almost dead in many countries. And urbanism was something that was the beginning and a strategic development of the city in the next century or so. And it's dead. You know, private overtook the public. And this is another discussion, but that's really the truth. That's why we have so many, in so many occasions, in so many cities, terrible lighting, which was invested by the private investor, in which you can't really recognize the building which is illuminated, because he's not lighting up the architecture in that case. He's showing how important he is. And that, I think, it's wrong. And then I salute laws and regulations, but not the kind that we have in Croatia. So we can't work like this, you know, because we're never going to make anything done. You know, we have to cooperate, and this is the only way that we can do it. And for all that, it takes courage for all the parties involved. It really takes courage today. Lighting designer today sometimes, believe me, is a hero, because we have to go through and who we have to, you know, talk to at which levels, sometimes it's unbelievable. So, you know, only together we should adopt a new conception of lighting ecology and rethink the fundamental principles of public lighting functionality. Thank you very much.